Hi there, it's Mr. Clark. Welcome to lesson 12.5.4 in analyzing sonata form. So, what I've been showing you has been a pretty typical example of sonata form as it developed in the classical era. Before I set you loose to look at your own sonata forms, I want to just talk through some deformations of the form that you might see, some unusual things that it's like, oh, this is not quite the normal model, but it's a thing that also happens. So, as it increased in length and complexity, it necessarily strayed from its most basic form. But the big thing about this is that composers knew what sonata form was. So if they deviated from it, it was intentional, and it was like, oh, you expect this to happen, but I'm going to do this instead. So everything existed in dialogue with the standard form, which is why I taught you the standard form. If this is something that you're interested in, there's a great resource called Sonata Theory by Hepikowski and Darcy that I would recommend checking out. But as just a short list, before the exposition, you might have some sort of introduction. Um, Introductions are often slow in contrast to the rest of the sonata form proper. In your exposition, there might not be a clear cadence in the tonic key in your primary thematic area, but you start there. You don't need a super strong cadence. It's just like, you know what key you're in. The beginning of the transition might be unclear or obscured. We saw that in the recap of the piece that we were looking at. The transition might be connected directly to the secondary thematic area. Usually there's some sort of pause between them, kind of clear the air. I don't think I mentioned it, but it's in the text. We would call it the medial caesura, the halfway cut or silence. But if the transition is directly connected, it might be unclear where exactly the transition ends and the secondary thematic area begins. Secondary thematic area might be in an unusual key. It might use the same thematic material as the primary thematic area. This would be known as monothematic, one theme. Haydn was particularly fond of doing this. The way you tell the difference is, well, it's in a different key. Secondary thematic area might have more themes than seems reasonable. There could be 3 or 4 different themes, all in your second key. As long as you're staying in that second key and you don't have your big cadence yet, still secondary thematic area. The closing might be significantly longer than you expect. It might introduce new themes, even a new key. The closing material we saw was short and sweet. It was just 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, 5, 1, but it can be a lot more involved, and like we talked about, the exposition might not be repeated, making it more difficult to locate where the end of the exposition is. So, one of the big things here is that, things might be unclear, obscured, ambiguous. That might seem scary, but that's actually exciting because that means that different people can have different opinions and they can defend their opinions and explain why they think music works this way. And that kind of discussion is really getting more to the heart of what music theory is. Music theory isn't this is an A natural, this is a sharp, this is a B major scale. That's just like learning your letters and learning how to spell words in elementary school. The exciting things happen when you actually get to analyze and discuss pieces of literature. And it's the same thing for music, and that's what we're able to do now. So development, modulations might be more frequent and drastic. You might have some new themes in the development. Beethoven did this, especially as he got on into some of his later pieces. One of my favorite things, development might contain a false recapitulation, where if you're not paying attention carefully, it sounds like the recap is happening, but it's actually in the wrong key, and it gets yanked away, and it's like, haha, I tricked you. Love false recaps, they're great. And then recapitulation, something you might want to watch out for, is parts of the exposition might return out of order. It's common to have them in exactly the same order. There's, what is it? It's the Stravinsky octet. The first movement is in kind of a sonata form sort of thing, but in the recap, he switches the primary and secondary thematic areas. So your secondary theme first, and then you end with your primary theme. That's a pretty cool thing. Not super common in the classical era, but Stravinsky was writing in the early 1900s. So, he had to play around with some things. After the recap, there might be a lengthy coda. Beethoven was fond of this. He used it to serve as kind of a second development section, where you've had all of your themes, you develop them, then you recap all your themes, and then he's like, but what if we developed them again? So I believe the first movement of his Fifth Symphony, da 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 da, has this kind of lengthy coda where there's stuff going on even after the recap. When you're analyzing sonata form, like you should, list out where the sections are, but it's not super exciting to say the primary thematic area comes first, the transition comes next, the secondary thematic area comes next. Like that's what we expect. Still want to note where they are, but any deviations like these are noteworthy and you should talk about them. Like if the secondary thematic area comes back before the primary thematic area, that's exciting. Why might the composer have done that? So these are just questions to ask, things to look out for. Happy analyzing sonata form.